The air here is thick with something older than memory. Somewhere beneath the roots of strangler figs, beneath centuries of monsoon rain and forest silence, an entire world is still breathing. And the question that should stop you cold is this: how does the largest pre-industrial city on Earth simply disappear? How does a civilization that carved tens of thousands of figures into sandstone, that engineered reservoirs 7 kilometers long, that built a temple so perfectly aligned with the cosmos that its towers mirror the constellation of Draco at the spring equinox, how does all of that vanish beneath a canopy of green? The answer, as it turns out, is not simple, and it is far more extraordinary than the disappearance itself. Welcome to the story of the Khmer Empire. This is not a fragment. This is not a highlight reel. What you are about to follow is the complete arc of one of history's most astonishing civilizations. From its earliest roots in the Indianized trading kingdom of Funan along the Mekong Delta, through the political fragmentation of Chinla, all the way to the moment in 802 CE, when a king named Jayavarman II climbed a plateau called Phnom Kulen and declared himself a Devaraja, a god king, severing his kingdom from foreign dominion and igniting an empire that would endure for over 600 years. You will walk the western causeway of Angkor Wat as it was being raised in gray sandstone around 1122 CE. Its moat stretching 190 meters wide, its gallery walls slowly filling with carved figures depicting the churning of the ocean of milk. You will stand inside the Bayon as Jayavarman VII's 216 stone faces emerge from morning mist after 1181 CE, each one wearing that same serene, half-smiling expression that seems to watch every direction at once. You will enter the lives of ordinary Khmers, the farmers, the artisans, the temple dancers, the people who made this world function beneath the shadow of its sacred mountains. And you will witness the unraveling, the slow accumulation of sediment in canals, the quiet spread of Theravada Buddhism, reshaping the bond between kings and people, the military pressure from Ayutthaya building in the west until, in 1431 CE, it could no longer be held back. You will watch the jungle move in, patient, indifferent, absolute. What makes the Khmer story matter beyond its monuments is this: it is a story about the relationship between human ambition and natural force, between the desire to build heaven on earth and the earth's quiet refusal to hold that shape forever. The stones of Angkor are still standing, the roots are still splitting them, and Cambodia's flag still carries the silhouette of Angkor Wat at its center, a daily act of remembrance that what was built in devotion and sandstone does not easily surrender to time. If you find meaning in these complete journeys through the ancient world, please subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. Each week, we bring you the full story of a civilization, not pieces, but the whole living arc from first breath to lasting echo. Let us begin our journey into the world the Khmers built, and into the jungle that is still, even now, giving it back to us. The Mekong moves at dawn the way it has always moved, wide, unhurried, carrying red silt down from the Tibetan plateau toward a delta that spreads like an open hand across the southern lowlands. In the first centuries of the Common Era, this river and its surrounding floodplains are not empty. They are alive with trade, with ritual, with the slow accumulation of power that precedes all great civilizations. The kingdom scholars call Funan dominates the lower Mekong Delta from roughly the 1st century CEE onward. Its ports receive ships from India, from Rome, from Han China. merchants unload glass beads, tin ingots, and bolts of fine cloth. They carry away spices, aromatic woods, and gold. Funan is not a jungle kingdom. It is a maritime state, sophisticated and outward-looking, its rulers absorbing Sanskrit titles, Hindu cosmology, and Brahmin ritual specialists arriving steadily from the Indian subcontinent. Bronze figurines of Vishnu, cast with extraordinary refinement, are recovered centuries later from sites along the delta. Objects that speak of deep Indianization, of a world where local Austroasiatic traditions and South Asian learning fuse into something entirely new. By the 6th century, Funan's dominance begins to fracture. An inland power called Chenla consolidates along the middle Mekong and the Moon River basin, absorbing Funan's northern territories and gradually displacing its coastal authority. Chenla is harder, more territorial, oriented toward the interior rather than the sea. Its rulers build in brick, small, precisely constructed temple towers rising from flat ground, their walls covered in carved sandstone panels depicting Shiva, Vishnu, and the divine hierarchies of Hindu cosmology. At Sambor Prey Kuk, in what is now central Cambodia, a cluster of these early brick prasats still stands, weathered, moss-darkened, their stucco ornament largely dissolved by centuries of monsoon rain, but structurally intact, the oldest surviving monumental architecture in the region. Yet, Chenla itself does not hold. By the 7th century, Chinese sources describe it splitting into land, Chenla and Water Chenla, competing principalities fighting over river crossings, rice land, and sacred legitimacy. The political landscape fragments into a mosaic of small courts, each claiming divine descent, each maintaining its own Brahmin priests and its own consecrated linga. Sanskrit inscriptions carved into stone doorframes record donations to temples, genealogies of rulers, and the names of gods. These inscriptions are among the earliest written records of the region, precise, formal, composed in a language imported from the subcontinent, but adapted to local political realities. Through this fragmentation, something is quietly accumulating. The hydraulic knowledge of managing seasonal floods, the theological vocabulary of divine kingship, the artistic traditions of stone carving and bronze casting, the administrative logic of temple-centered governance, all of it deepens across generations. The land itself shapes what is coming. The Tonle Sap Lake, swelling each monsoon season to 3 times its dry season size, offers a natural abundance of fish and fertile silt that no other region in Southeast Asia can match. Whoever learns to govern this water, to channel and store and release it with precision, will command not just land, but life itself. By the late 8th century, the principalities of the former Chenla world are exhausted by internal conflict. Some have fallen under the influence of the Sailendra dynasty of Java, whose cultural and possibly political reach extends across maritime Southeast Asia. The stage is fractured, the old order spent. Into this world, a figure is moving, consolidating, negotiating, fighting where necessary, building alliances across the scattered courts of the Cambodian interior. His name is Jayavarman. The silence before a civilization's birth is almost indistinguishable from ordinary time. Only later does it become clear that everything was preparation. Phnom Kulin rises from the Cambodian plain like a held breath, a sandstone plateau lifting above the surrounding forest, its edges dropping sharply into jungle ravines where streams run cold and clear over carved stone riverbed reliefs. In 802 CE, this plateau becomes the center of the known world, A Brahmin priest named Hiranyadama performs a consecration ritual at the summit, and the man who has spent years consolidating the fractured principalities of the Cambodian interior is declared a Devaraja, a god king, a universal sovereign whose divine authority is embodied in a sacred linga, the symbol of Shiva's creative power. His name is Jayavarman II, and what happens on this plateau is not merely a coronation. It is a declaration of independence, a theological statement, and the founding act of an empire. The Devaraja cult transforms kingship into cosmology. The king is no longer simply a ruler of men. He is the earthly axis of the universe, the point where divine order descends into the human world. The sacred linga installed at the ritual's center becomes the empire's spiritual heart, housed eventually in a temple mountain at the capital, tended by Brahmin priests whose lineage will maintain the cult across generations. Jayavarman II moves his court several times, establishing capitals at Indrapura, Hariharalaya, and finally returning to the Angkor Plain before his death around 835 CE. Each move consolidates territory, absorbs local elites, and extends the network of loyalty that holds the new kingdom together. The Angkor Plain itself rewards close attention. Flat, vast, and seasonally flooded by the retreating waters of the Tonle Sap, it offers exactly what an ambitious civilization requires: rich alluvial soil, reliable water, and space to build without limit. The gray-green expanse stretches toward the lake's northern shore, and in the dry season, the exposed lakebed becomes some of the most productive agricultural land in Southeast Asia. Whoever controls this plain controls the food supply of a region. Jayavarman II's successors understand this completely. When Indravarman I takes power in 877 CE, he inherits a kingdom with ambition but limited monumental architecture. He moves quickly. Before building a single temple, he constructs the Indratataka, a massive reservoir north of Hariharalaya, approximately 3.8 kilometers long and 800 meters wide, its earthen embankments rising to contain an enormous volume of water for dry season irrigation. The logic is deliberate and precise. Water first, then stone. Then comes stone. In 879 CE, Indravarman I dedicates Preah Ko, the sacred bull, a temple complex of 6 brick prasats arranged in 2 rows on a low laterite platform. The towers are built from fired brick bonded with vegetable compounds, their surfaces covered in carved stucco that still preserves traces of extraordinary detail: floral medallions, guardian figures, Sanskrit inscriptions recording the temple's dedication to the royal ancestors and to Shiva. The brick weathers to a deep ochre red in the Cambodian heat, and the stucco carvings catch afternoon light in ways that make the surface seem almost alive. Preah Ko is modest in scale compared to what will follow, but it establishes a template: the temple as ancestor shrine, the king as mediator between the living and the divine dead. Standing on the Angkor Plain in the late 9th century, looking north toward the Kulin Plateau and south toward the glittering surface of the Tonle Sap, the shape of what is coming begins to be visible. The hydraulic infrastructure is in place. The theological framework is established. The architectural language is forming. An empire does not announce itself all at once. It accumulates, layer by layer, like the sandstone deposits of the plateau above, each stratum laid down in its own time, patient and precise, until the whole becomes something that cannot be ignored. The water arrives before anything else. Each year, as the monsoon pushes north from the Gulf of Thailand, the Tonle Sap River reverses its flow, a phenomenon almost without parallel on Earth. The lake at its heart swells from roughly 2,500 square kilometers to nearly 16,000, rising 6 meters or more, flooding the surrounding forest, depositing rich sediment across an enormous basin before retreating again as the dry season returns. To live beside the Tonle Sap is to live inside a rhythm older than any kingdom. The Khmer did not merely adapt to this rhythm, they learned to conduct it. Around 889 CE, Yasovarman I moves the center of Khmer power northward, founding the city of Yasodarapura on the flat plain between the Kulen Plateau and the lake's northern shore. This is the first true Angkor, not yet the vast metropolis it will become, but already a deliberate act of cosmological planning. The city is oriented to cardinal directions, its boundaries defined by earthen embankments, its center marked by the natural hill of Phnom Bakheng, which Yasovarman crowns with a sandstone temple mountain. Seen from the air, Phnom Bakheng rises from the surrounding plain with quiet authority. Its 5 tiers of gray stone ascending toward a central prasat, its 108 smaller towers arranged in precise astronomical alignment. At sunset, the stone catches the last light and holds it briefly before releasing it to darkness. But the monument that defines Yasovarman's reign is not built of stone, it is built of earth and water. The East Baray, Yashodarataka, stretches nearly 7 kilometers from east to west and almost 2 kilometers from north to south. Its embankments, raised by tens of thousands of laborers moving laterite and compacted earth, still exist today as low ridges visible from the air. At full capacity, the reservoir held an estimated 50 million cubic meters of water. Channels fed it from the Siem Reap River, which descends from the Kulen Plateau carrying the monsoon's surplus. Sluice gates controlled the release, directing water outward through a network of canals into the rice paddies that spread across the plain in every direction. The engineering logic is elegant in its simplicity. The Tonle Sap's annual flood provided the raw abundance. The Barre system captured, stored, and redistributed that abundance across the dry season, when the lake retreated and the paddies would otherwise crack and fail. With reliable water, Khmer farmers could cultivate multiple rice harvests per year, a surplus that fed not just the population, but the armies of laborers, artisans, priests, and administrators that a growing empire required. Water, in the Khmer system, was not separate from power, it was power's foundation. Yasovarman I also constructs ashrams, religious retreats, at the 4 cardinal points of his kingdom, each bearing a Sanskrit inscription that describes the king in terms of cosmic sovereignty. The inscriptions are precise, formulaic, and revealing. They speak of a ruler who embodies both Shiva and the sun, whose merit sustains the world, whose reservoirs mirror the celestial ocean. Theology and hydraulics are not separate concerns. The Barre is simultaneously an irrigation system and a sacred sea. Its central island temple, the Mabon, rising from the water like Mount Meru from the primordial ocean of Hindu cosmology. By the close of the 10th century, the plain of Angkor is already a managed landscape of extraordinary complexity. Canal networks trace straight lines across the terrain. Rice paddies extend in every direction, their surfaces catching the sky. Temple towers punctuate the horizon at intervals, each one a fixed point in a sacred geography that mirrors the heavens above. The monsoon still arrives each year with its ancient indifference, but now it enters a system built to receive it, channeled, measured, and turn toward human purpose with a precision that will sustain this civilization for centuries yet to come. The Western Causeway stretches across still water in the early morning, a stone bridge connecting the mortal world to something else entirely. The moat surrounding Angkor Wat measures 190 meters wide and extends nearly 5 kilometers around the temple's perimeter, its surface holding the sky like polished bronze. At this hour, the 5 towers of the central sanctuary rise from their own reflection, gray sandstone dissolving into gray water. And the effect is not architectural, but cosmological. This is precisely what Jayavarman II intended when construction began around 1122 CE. The king who commissioned Angkor Wat ruled an empire stretching from the Mekong Delta westward into the Chao Phraya Basin, northward into the Moon River Valley of modern Thailand, and southward toward the Malay Peninsula. His military campaigns pressed into Champa to the east and probed the borders of the Jai Viet kingdom beyond. Inscriptions record his armies moving through jungle and river corridor, consolidating territories that fed tribute, labor, and sandstone into the imperial center at Angkor. The empire at this moment governs millions, and its capital is the administrative, spiritual, and hydraulic heart of a civilization at absolute confidence. Angkor Wat is the physical expression of that confidence, dedicated to Vishnu rather than Shiva, an unusual choice that may reflect Jayavarman II's personal devotion. The temple is oriented westward, toward the setting sun, toward the realm of the dead in Hindu cosmology, suggesting the complex may have served simultaneously as a royal mausoleum and a living sanctuary. The enclosure covers nearly 200 hectares. The central tower rises approximately 65 meters above the surrounding plain, its lotus bud finial catching light that has not yet reached the ground below. The sandstone itself arrives from Phnom Kulin, quarried from the same plateau where Jayavarman II declared his Devaraja 3 centuries earlier. Blocks weighing several tons travel by raft along canals connecting the quarry to the construction site, a logistical operation requiring thousands of workers, engineers, and administrators coordinating across decades. The stone is gray, fine-grained, and responsive to the chisel in ways that laterite is not, allowing the sculptors who follow the masons to carve with extraordinary precision. Those sculptors fill the gallery walls with narrative. The bas-relief program running along Angkor Wat's outer gallery extends approximately 800 meters in total length, making it among the largest continuous narrative carvings in human history. In raking morning light, the figures emerge from the stone with startling clarity. Armies marching in disciplined rows, elephants carrying commanders in gilded hodas, celestial apsaras floating above battle lines. The southern gallery depicts Jayavarman II himself, seated in royal audience, his body shown larger than those surrounding him in the visual grammar of divine kingship. The western gallery presents the churning of the ocean of milk, gods and demons pulling a cosmic serpent around Mount Mandara, churning the primordial sea to extract the elixir of immortality. The composition stretches nearly 50 meters, its figures carved with a fluency suggesting not individual genius, but a tradition of accumulated mastery. Generations of sculptors working within a refined aesthetic system. The stone breathes with movement even in stillness. Angkor Wat does not stand alone. It anchors an urban landscape already dense with temples, reservoirs, roads, and settlements. The hydraulic network established by Yasovarman I and expanded by subsequent rulers continues feeding rice paddies across the plain. The empire's administrative machinery, its provincial governors, its Sanskrit-literate scribes, its temple priests managing vast land endowments, operates with a complexity that rivals any contemporary civilization on Earth. What rises from this plain in the 12th century is not merely a monument. It is the visible summit of a system centuries in the making, a civilization that has learned to turn water, stone, and theological ambition into a single, unified world. Behind the monuments, behind the god-kings and their consecrated lingas, behind the sandstone mountains rising toward a cosmological heaven, there is another Angkor entirely. It moves at the pace of water through irrigation channels, of a chisel tapping rhythmically against gray stone, of bare feet crossing a wooden footbridge above a flooded paddy field at first light. This is the Angkor that fed the empire, carved its walls, danced before its altars, and kept the entire system breathing. The agricultural calendar governs everything. When the monsoon arrives each May, the Tonle Sap swells and the paddies flood on schedule, guided not by chance but by the hydraulic network that generations of Khmer engineers have refined across centuries. Farmers work in family groups, transplanting rice seedlings into standing water, reading the sky and the canal levels with practiced precision. The barrays and their distribution channels ensure that even in years of irregular rainfall, water reaches the fields. A single harvest cycle feeds not only villages but the enormous populations of temple servants, artisans, soldiers, and priests that the inscriptions record in careful detail. The Ta Prohm inscription of 1186 CE offers a rare window into this world. It records over 12,000 people serving a single temple complex: rice farmers, dancers, musicians, cooks, gardeners, and Sanskrit scholars, all sustained by land endowments and grain stores administered through the temple's own bureaucratic apparatus. Multiply this across the hundreds of temples operating simultaneously across the Angkor Plain, and the scale of organized human activity becomes staggering. The temple is not merely a place of worship. It is an economic engine, a redistribution center, a community anchor. In the workshops adjacent to temple construction sites, artisans work sandstone with iron chisels and wooden mallets. The stone arrives from Phnom Kulen quarries, floated down canals on wooden rafts, already rough cut into manageable blocks. Skilled carvers then work the surface with extraordinary patience, producing the Apsara figures, celestial dancers, that cover gallery walls and pilaster faces across the empire. At Banteay Srey, consecrated in 967 CE, these carvings reach a refinement that later generations will consider the apex of Khmer sculptural art. The Apsaras stand in slight tribhanga postures, their hips tilted, their headdresses rising in layered tiers of carved lotus and flame, their expressions holding a stillness that feels less like stone and more like interrupted breath. Bronze casting operates alongside stone carving. Workshops produce deity figures, ritual vessels, and decorative fittings using lost wax techniques inherited from earlier Indianized traditions. Molten bronze poured into clay molds emerges as Vishnu figures with 4 arms, as Shiva lingas with gilded tips, as Lokeshvara Bodhisattva, faces that will eventually multiply across the towers of the Bayon. Silk textiles, their patterns reconstructed from bas-relief evidence, drape the bodies of court figures and temple dancers in layered sampot garments with pleated fronts and jeweled belts. Along the river routes connecting Angkor to the wider world, merchants move goods by boat, Chinese ceramics arriving from the north, aromatic resins and forest products moving toward coastal ports, salt traveling inland from the Gulf of Thailand. The Bayon's bas-relief panels, carved in the late 12th century, preserve market scenes with a documentary precision that no inscription matches. Vendors seated behind low tables, buyers examining cloth, children watching from doorways, a woman adjusting a basket balanced on her head. These are not idealized figures. They are observed ones. Sanskrit inscriptions record the transactions of the powerful. Khmer language inscriptions record the transactions of everyone else: land grants, temple donations, the names of village headmen, the quantities of rice owed in tax. Together, they form an administrative record of a civilization that understood the relationship between writing and control, between documentation and permanence. The stone that carries these words will outlast the people who carved them by 1,000 years, preserving in silence what the jungle cannot consume. In 1177 CE, Cham naval forces sail up the Mekong and the Tonle Sap, breach Angkor's defenses, and occupy the capital. The king reigning at that moment dies in the chaos. The great city, its temples, its markets, its hydraulic arteries, falls briefly under foreign control. It is a wound the Khmer world has never experienced at this scale, and it will define everything that follows. 4 years later, a prince who has spent decades navigating the dangerous currents of Khmer court politics reconquers the capital. Jayavarman II is already past middle age when he takes power in 1181 CE. What he builds in the decades that follow will surpass everything the empire has ever produced. The South Gate of Angkor. Tom still stands at the end of a causeway flanked by stone figures. 54 gods on one side, 54 demons on the other, each row gripping the body of a massive Naga serpent. The gate tower rises above them, its 4 faces gazing outward in every cardinal direction, with an expression that carries neither triumph nor severity. It is something closer to compassion, a quality deliberately chosen because Jayavarman VII has converted to Mahayana Buddhism, and the face looking outward from every tower of his new capital is understood to be the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, the embodiment of mercy. Angkor Thom is not a temple. It is a city within a city, a royal enclosure 9 kilometers in circumference, enclosed by a laterite wall and a wide moat, containing palaces, administrative buildings, and at its precise center, the Bayon. The Bayon rises in tiers of gray sandstone, its upper level dissolving into 54 towers, each carved with 4 enormous faces. In morning mist, the towers emerge slowly from the gray air, the faces appearing one by one as light strengthens, serene and enormous, watching in all directions simultaneously. No other structure at the ancient world produces quite this effect. Beyond Angkor Thom, the construction continues outward across the empire. Ta Prohm is dedicated in 1186 CE. Its own inscription records the staggering human infrastructure required to maintain a single temple, more than 12,000 people in service, including nearly 3,000 workers, hundreds of dancers, and dozens of physicians. Preah Khan follows, another vast monastery temple complex north of the Bayon, its long corbelled corridors stretching through filtered forest light. The Jayatataka Barre, a reservoir north of Angkor Thom, measuring roughly 3.5 kilometers by 900 meters, feeds the new hydraulic network supporting these foundations. What distinguishes Jayavarman VII from every predecessor is not merely scale, but ideology. Where earlier kings built temple mountains to house their divine essence as Hindu deities, Jayavarman VII builds hospitals. An inscription records a network of 102 hospitals distributed across the empire, each stocked with medicines, staffed with doctors and attendants, open to the sick regardless of status. 121 rest houses line the royal roads connecting Angkor to its provincial centers. These are not monuments to a god-king's glory in the traditional sense. They are expressions of a Buddhist sovereign whose legitimacy rests on the relief of suffering. The sandstone faces of the Bayon carry this message in permanent form. They do not command, they observe, they endure. Jayavarman VII dies around 1218 CE, leaving behind a transformed empire. Its theology shifted, its capital rebuilt, its roads and hospitals extending the reach of a Buddhist kingship across hundreds of kilometers of mainland Southeast Asia. The stone he raised will stand for centuries after the system that built it has dissolved. The faces will still be watching when the jungle arrives. The empty niches tell the story before any inscription can. Along the inner galleries of the Bayon, where serene Buddha figures once occupied carved recesses in the stone, there are now only hollows, scraped clean, the surfaces rough, where chisels worked deliberately against the images, faces removed, postures erased. The silence left behind is not accidental, it is policy. After Jayavarman VII's death around 1218 CE, the empire does not collapse. It contracts, slowly and unevenly, like a great structure settling under its own accumulated weight. The transition is not violent at first. It is administrative, theological, incremental, but the direction is unmistakable. Jayavarman VIII ascends to power in 1243 CE and rules for over 50 years until 1295 CE. His reign marks a deliberate reversal. The Mahayana Buddhist framework that Jayavarman VII had woven into every hospital inscription, every road marker, every stone face at the Bayon, all of it becomes subject to revision. Jayavarman VIII restores Hindu iconography across the empire's temple complexes, converting Buddhist shrines back to Shaivite dedications, replacing Buddha images with lingas, and ordering the systematic defacement of Buddhist sculpture on a scale that modern archaeologists are still measuring. Thousands of images are affected. The Bayon itself, that extraordinary statement of Buddhist compassion in stone, is partially altered, its inner sanctuary rededicated, its imagery contested. Yet the transformation is never total. Theravada Buddhism, arriving from Sri Lanka and spreading through the Mon peoples of the Western mainland, moves through Khmer society not from the palace downward, but from the village upward. Monks in saffron robes establish monasteries outside the great temple enclosures. The Pali Canon, accessible and direct in a way that Sanskrit court religion never was, finds audiences among farmers, traders, and minor officials. The relationship between ordinary Khmers and the sacred begins to shift, away from the god-king as cosmic intermediary, toward a more personal, communal practice of merit-making and renunciation. In 1296 CE, a Chinese envoy named Zhou Daguan arrives at Angkor as part of a diplomatic mission and spends nearly a year observing the city. His account, written after his return, is the most detailed eyewitness description of Angkor that survives. He records a city still functioning, its markets active, its royal processions elaborate, its population dense along the roads leading to the central enclosure. He notes the king's golden palanquin, the palace's gilded towers, the the fish-filled moats, and the layered social world of priests, officials, slaves, and traders. Angkor in 1296 CE is not a dying city, but Zhou Daguan also records tensions, religious disputes, the growing influence of Theravada monks, and a court navigating competing spiritual loyalties. Beneath the social surface, the hydraulic foundation is showing stress. The great barrays and canal networks that sustained Angkor's agricultural surplus were engineering achievements of extraordinary precision, but they required constant maintenance, dredging, embankment repair, sediment removal. Modern LiDAR surveys conducted across Greater Angkor between 2012 and 2015 reveal something the jungle had hidden for centuries. Evidence of emergency modifications to canal channels, hasty repairs to distribution networks, and areas where sediment accumulation appears to have overwhelmed the system's capacity. Climate data drawn from regional paleoclimate records suggests that the 13th and 14th centuries brought intensified monsoon variability, periods of severe drought alternating with catastrophic flooding, stressing a hydraulic system calibrated for predictable seasonal rhythms. The rice surplus that once fed a metropolis begins to thin. The administrative machinery that maintained the canals depends on royal authority and organized labor. As that authority fragments and the theological consensus that once unified king, temple, and farmer dissolves, the maintenance cycles slow. Forest edges advance toward canal embankments. Silt accumulates where water once ran clear. The system does not fail in a single season. It degrades across generations, quietly, beneath the surface of a civilization, still performing its rituals and carving its stones. The Bayon's faces continue watching through all of it, patient, eroded at the edges now, moss beginning its slow work in the carved recesses of stone cheeks and lidded eyes. The empire is still present, but the foundation beneath it has begun, almost imperceptibly, to crack. The roots arrive before the armies do. Along the outer galleries of Ta Prohm, strangler figs have already sent their first tendrils into the joints between sandstone blocks, following moisture through cracks that maintenance crews once sealed with careful regularity. Now those crews are fewer, the mortar loosens, the roots find their way deeper, patient and indifferent, splitting stone with a force that accumulates across decades rather than days. The jungle does not conquer Angkor in a single assault. It enters through every neglected seam. But armies do come. By the mid-14th century, the Ayutthaya kingdom has consolidated power to the west, in the Chao Phraya River valley of what is now central Thailand. Founded around 1351 CE, Ayutthaya inherits Thai military traditions and absorbs Khmer administrative and artistic conventions, even as it challenges Khmer dominance. The relationship between the two powers is not simply one of foreign invasion. Ayutthaya's court speaks a language shaped by Khmer culture, builds temples influenced by Khmer forms, and yet presses eastward with increasing force. The first major Ayutthayan campaigns against Angkor occur in the 1350s, and again in the early 15th century. Khmer forces repel these early incursions, and the capital holds. But each campaign drains resources, disrupts the agricultural calendar, and accelerates the degradation of the hydraulic infrastructure that the empire can no longer fully maintain. The pressure does not relent. In 1431 CE, Ayutthayan forces besiege Angkor. The siege lasts months. When the city finally falls, the Khmer court does not simply surrender a building. It surrenders the symbolic center of a civilization that had organized itself around the idea that its capital was the axis of the cosmos. Skilled artisans, court dancers, administrators, and priests are taken westward to Ayutthaya, a transfer of human knowledge that reshapes the cultural landscape of mainland Southeast Asia for generations. The Khmer court withdraws southward. The relocation is not immediate or absolute, but over the following decades, the political center of gravity shifts toward the confluence of the Mekong and Tonle Sap rivers, where Phnom Penh gradually assumes the role of capital. The riverfront there offers different strategic logic: access to maritime trade routes, proximity to the delta, distance from the exposed Angkor Plain. The great hydraulic city, built to feed a landlocked empire through engineered water control, no longer fits the political geography of a diminished kingdom oriented toward rivers and sea. Angkor is not entirely emptied. Buddhist monks continue to inhabit Angkor Wat through the 15th and 16th centuries, maintaining its shrines, adding new votive images, and preserving the temple's sacred function, even as the surrounding urban infrastructure dissolves back into forest. The post-Angkor Khmer court establishes successive capitals at Long Vec and later Udong, each carrying fragments of the older ceremonial and artistic traditions forward into a changed world. Meanwhile, the forest advances with complete indifference to human history. Aerial views of the Angkor region reveal what centuries of encroachment produce: a vast green canopy interrupted by stone towers, their upper courses wrapped in root systems that have become, paradoxically, both the agents of destruction and the structures holding certain walls upright. At Ta Prohm, the symbiosis between tree and stone reaches its most dramatic expression. Silk cotton trees and strangler figs drape themselves across collapsed galleries, their roots flowing over lintels like frozen water, pressing into corbelled vaults with a slow, irresistible weight. The Gopura towers lean. Some collapse entirely. Others survive precisely because the root systems binding them have become load-bearing elements in their own right. The Bayon's faces remain above the canopy, watching a city that no longer watches back. The faces do not disappear. Even after the court relocates southward, even after the hydraulic city falls silent and the forest begins its long, patient work, Buddhist monks continue to tend Angkor Wat. Through the 15th and 16th centuries, while the political center of Khmer life shifts toward the Mekong confluence at Phnom Penh, the Great Temple never fully empties. Portuguese missionaries moving through mainland Southeast Asia in the 1550s encounter it still inhabited, still burning incense, still receiving pilgrims who walk the Western Causeway at dawn, just as worshippers did 4 centuries before. Their written accounts reach Europe, but Europe does not yet know what to make of them. The temples are described as wonders, as ruins of impossible scale, as evidence of a civilization whose name has grown unfamiliar. For nearly 3 more centuries, Angkor remains known to the people who live beside it, tended in fragments, partially understood, partially mythologized. Then, in 1860, a French naturalist named Henri Mouhot arrives. His sketches, careful, precise, filled with the quiet astonishment of a man confronting something his education has not prepared him for, circulate through European journals and ignite a fascination that has not since subsided. Mouhot does not discover Angkor. He introduces it to an audience that had forgotten to look. His drawings of the central towers, of the Naga balustrades, of the gallery walls dense with carved figures, carry a quality of reverence that transcends documentation. By 1898, the École Française d'Extrême-Orient establishes its archaeological mission. Over the following decades, French scholars and Cambodian workers together undertake the enormous labor of clearing, mapping, and stabilizing what centuries of forest have claimed. The anastylosis method, dismantling collapsed sections stone by stone and reassembling them on documented foundations, restores entire galleries. Scaffolding rises against towers that have not felt human hands since the 16th century. The work is slow, meticulous, and transformative. In 1992, UNESCO designates Angkor a World Heritage Site, formalizing what the stones themselves have always argued, that this place belongs to human civilization entire, not only to the nation that inherited it. Visitor numbers climb steadily. Before 2020, more than 2 million people per year walk the Western Causeway, pause before the reflecting pool at dawn, and look up at 5 towers that Jayavarman II's architects oriented with deliberate precision toward the rising sun. LiDAR surveys conducted between 2012 and 2015 reveal something even the most experienced archaeologists had not fully anticipated. Beneath the forest canopy surrounding the known temples lies an urban landscape covering over 1,000 square kilometers. Roads, reservoirs, residential grids, and ceremonial avenues extending far beyond what ground-level excavation had mapped. Greater Angkor was not a city surrounded by jungle. It was a metropolis whose full dimensions the jungle had simply concealed. Cambodia's flag, adopted in 1948 and carried through every political transformation since independence, civil war, the devastation of the 1970s, Reconstruction, bears Angkor Wat at its center, 3 towers rendered in white against red and blue. The choice is not nostalgic. It is a declaration that the civilization which raised those towers is the same civilization that endures today, continuous across 6 centuries of change. The Western Causeway stretches across still water at first light. Stone that was quarried at Phnom Kulen floated down ancient canals, shaped by hands whose names were never recorded, and set into place by an empire that believed it was building heaven on earth. That stone remains. It has outlasted the Devaraja cult, the hydraulic system, the Ayutthayan conquest, the French colonial period, and the violence of the 20th century. It stands in the morning mist, neither ruined nor restored to its original state, but something more honest than either, a living threshold between what was built and what endures. The Khmer Empire is not a story that ends. It is a story that the stone keeps telling. Thank you for joining this journey through one of history's most extraordinary civilizations. If these stories move you, subscribing to the channel ensures you never miss the next one. There are many more worlds waiting to be uncovered.